But, you know, at least the Department of the Interior has somebody nominally running that agency, even if he is treating the agency's resources like the world's best-funded Cub Scout troop. In this new nothing against the Cub Scouts. In this new administration, the largest federal agency in government, after the Defense Department and the Department of Veterans Affairs, is the Department of Homeland Security. And there's been nobody running the Department of Homeland Security since July. That's when retired General John Kelly left his job as Homeland Security Secretary to instead become the new White House Chief of Staff. Now, there has been a thrum of reporting over the past few days about what John Kelly's job is like these days in the White House. There's been vaguely sourced, but sort of alarming reporting about the extraordinary measures that John Kelly has had to take to basically constrain the president in terms of the president's access to people and information that he might otherwise seek out, and in terms of how John Kelly is sort of allowing the president to be seen and who he's allowing him to have contact with. There's also been reporting over the last few days over the prospect that the White House Chief of Staff job under this president may be an impossible one for anybody. And John Kelly may not be able to stay on much longer in his role running the White House. Reporter Gabe Sherman at Vanity Fair tonight adds some eye-popping details to those earlier reports with this short piece that has just been uploaded at VanityFair.com, citing two sources familiar with the conversation. Gabe Sherman reports tonight, quote, Trump vented to his longtime security chief, Keith Schiller, quote, I hate everyone in the White House. There are a few exceptions, but I hate them. Also, citing several people close to the president who have recently described the president as unstable, losing a step, and unraveling. Gabe Sherman says, quote, West Wing aides have also worried about Trump's public appearances. One Trump advisor tells Gabe Sherman that White House staff, quote, were relieved when Trump canceled his appearance on 60 Minutes last month. Quote, he's lost a step. They don't want him doing adversarial TV interviews. Also, in light of the NBC News report from early this morning that Trump randomly and out of the blue insisted at a Pentagon meeting in July that the U.S. should add tens of thousands of nuclear weapons to our stockpiles, that the United States should literally increase by a factor of 10 the number of nuclear weapons that we have on hand. In light of that reporting today from NBC News, Gabe Sherman quotes a former administration official who was willing to speculate to a reporter about what the nation might now have in terms of novel nuclear fail-safes for dealing with this particular president. Quote, one former official even speculated that Chief of Staff John Kelly and Secretary of Defense James Mattis have discussed what they would do in the event Trump ordered a nuclear first strike. Would they tackle him? The person said. And just in case that's not unsettling enough, here's how Gabe Sherman's piece ends tonight at Vanity Fair. I'm just going to quote this verbatim. Some West Wing advisors were worried that Trump's behavior could cause the cabinet to take extraordinary constitutional measures to remove him from office. Several months ago, according to two sources with knowledge of the conversation, former chief strategist Steve Bannon told Trump that the risk to his presidency wasn't impeachment, it was the 25th Amendment, the provision by which a majority of the cabinet can vote to remove the president in the event that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. Bannon mentioned the 25th Amendment to the president. The president reportedly said in response, "What's that?" According to a source, Bannon has told people he thinks Trump has only a 30% chance of making it through at the end of his full term. 30% chance of making it. So that would make it a 70% chance that Trump's own cabinet could remove him from office because he's unable to serve as president, or he'll be impeached, or he'll quit, or, I don't know, he'll be removed from office some other way. That's being attributed tonight to former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon, giving him a 30% chance of finishing his term. You know, and take that for what you will. But bottom line, it is not good when that's the general character of the leaks that are being attributed to the leaks and comments that are being attributed to current West Wing staffers and former administration officials and people personally close to the president and people who have served as his top advisors. I'm highlighting this reporting, though, specifically because there is something here about what may be about to happen next. Quoting from the same report, 2 senior Republican officials say Chief of Staff John Kelly is miserable in his job and is only remaining there out of a sense of duty to keep Trump from making some sort of disastrous decision. Today, speculation about John Kelly's future increased after Politico.com reported that Kelly's deputy, Kirstjen Nielsen, is likely to be named Secretary of Homeland Security. The theory among Republicans is that John Kelly wants to give her a soft landing before his own departure from the White House. So Politico.com was first to report today that John Kelly's deputy, Kirstjen Nielsen, would be the administration's new nominee to run Homeland Security. And NBC News has since confirmed that Kirstjen Nielsen will be nominated for that job. And who knows, maybe that nomination, that expected nomination, did come about because of some yet to come further drama in terms of White House departures and more top-level senior staffers fleeing this young administration. Maybe that's why it's happening. I mean, presumably the White House could just keep running, even if it was just the president and his immediate family, right? I mean, maybe Eric could be chief of staff. Could the First Lady fill in? I don't know. Is Tiffany busy? I mean, I don't know. When you have this many senior people leave the administration, you start to wonder how many of them you really need. I mean, the whole Trump organization was like 6 guys, right? Who weren't related to the president, right? How many people do we really think he needs to run the federal government? But if further departures are expected, if that's the reason we're about to get a Homeland Security nominee, maybe we are still about to get a Homeland Security nominee. And you know what? That could matter a lot more than any of the soap opera and the palace intrigue and the continually unspooling chaos around this president and his unbelievably chaotic, impenetrable White House. It would, regardless of why it's going to happen, I don't really care why it's going to happen. If we do end up getting a Homeland Security secretary because of that mess and out of that mess, that would be important. If only because it would be really nice for us as a country to have someone running the agency that oversees FEMA, for example. FEMA's part of Homeland Security. Who's running Homeland Security? Nobody since July. Today, there was some very bad news out of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, home to 3.5 million Americans. It's been 3 weeks since Hurricane Maria made landfall. Today, the governor of Puerto Rico confirmed the first deaths on the island that he attributed to a bacterial disease called leptospirosis. Leptospirosis is a bacterial infection that humans can get when they are using water sources that have been contaminated by animals. So if humans are drinking or otherwise in contact with water that's contaminated with urine from wildlife, particularly urine from rodents, this is the kind of disease that you can get from that, and it is treatable, but if it is not treated, it can kill you. 2 weeks ago, when we first spoke with the mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, she told us on the air about having turned around some supplies that she'd been given access to as the mayor of San Juan because she found another mayor who needed them more. She encountered a mayor from another town in Puerto Rico where people weren't just hard up like the residents of San Juan, the capital city. I mean, as far back as 2 weeks ago, she was telling us on the air about people in other Puerto Rican towns, about a mayor of another Puerto Rican town where they had zero access to clean water and where they were already drinking from creeks and streams to stay alive. That's how you get something like leptospirosis. And, you know, this was not us doing some investigation. This is me sitting in New York talking by satellite with a local official who was describing to me that this was happening 2 weeks ago. This is local officials, Puerto Rican mayors, sounding the alarm, letting the mainland United States know through the national media as far back as 2 weeks ago that this is what Americans were having to do for drinking water. Streams and creeks and springs. And now we're 2 weeks on from that. It's 3 weeks into the crisis. And that is still how these Americans are having to cope. A third of the island still has no drinking water, even as of now. And so not by choice, but by necessity, these American citizens, 3 weeks on, are still drinking from rivers, drinking from creeks, drinking from springs, collecting rainwater. And speaking of useful Trump cabinet officials, Scott Pruitt's Environmental Protection Agency, they put out this as their Hurricane Maria update for today. Did you see this? Quote, there are reports of residents obtaining or trying to obtain drinking water from wells at hazardous waste Superfund sites in Puerto Rico. EPA advises against tampering with sealed and locked wells or drinking from these wells, as it may be dangerous to people's health. Imagine if you and your family, American citizens, your town is landlocked, you are penned in, no way out, 3 weeks without assistance, 3 weeks without electricity, 3 weeks without water. You can't live without water. And so for you and your kids and your family, you're choosing between death because of a lack of water, or drinking from a creek, or trying to drink from the sealed, locked well at the EPA Superfund site. Which would you pick? And now we've got confirmation from the top public official on the island that waterborne illness is starting to spike the death toll there. And of course it is, because that's what happens when people end up having to drink from creeks and streams for weeks. Before the governor's confirmation today, we had heard reports of deaths that were suspected to be from leptospirosis, from local hospitals, from local mayors, from the state epidemiologist, but now it's the governor confirming. And that follows a pattern in terms of the reporting on the overall toll of this disaster. A pattern that led Vox.com today to warn that even though the death toll today officially reached 48 in Puerto Rico, there's good reason to expect that the real death toll may be considerably higher. It may, in fact, be well into the hundreds already. Vox alone was able to find an additional 36 deaths that were attributed to the hurricane that were not people who have been listed in the official death toll. NPR reported an additional 49 bodies with an unidentified cause of death sent to one hospital morgue since the storm. According to one of the largest newspapers in Puerto Rico, there are 350 bodies being stored at the state medical examiner's office, the Institute of Forensic Sciences. 350 bodies, many of which are still awaiting autopsies. So a week ago, the president went to Puerto Rico, threw people paper towels, and congratulated Puerto Rico on the fact that there were only 16 people listed on the death toll. Well, the official death toll now is 48, and it's not because the hurricane kept hitting. It's now 48 and continuing to climb, including the first confirmed deaths from treatable waterborne illness, at a time when we know that whole towns have now gone for a couple of weeks, at least, subsisting on water sources like creeks and streams. And yeah, this was a big hurricane, and it caused a huge amount of damage. But this is the United States of America. And the deaths that are happening now, these are not the result of the hurricane. The deaths that are happening now are a result of the response to the hurricane, which is an organizational disaster. And I can be specific about what that means. The deaths the governor's attributing to leptospirosis today, which is a treatable bacterial infection. You treat it with doxycycline, you treat it with penicillin, you treat it with IV antibiotics if you get it as an advanced case. These deaths from lepto happened, according to the governor, in one of Puerto Rico's beleaguered hospitals. Right? You've heard that the hospitals have had such trouble. Well, one component of the Trump administration's response to this disaster was belatedly to send the USNS Comfort down there, this incredibly well-equipped, floating miracle of a hospital ship. And they didn't send it right away for some reason. It was sitting in Porton, Virginia for days instead of heading down to Puerto Rico to help, while the hospitals down there were struggling to find generators and the fuel to run them, and people were dying in the intensive care units because there was no power to fuel the machines, right? But the USNS finally got dispatched down there. It finally got there last week. The USNS Comfort really is a miracle. It's got 800 highly trained medical personnel on board, some of the best trained medical personnel in the world. They've got hundreds of beds, state-of-the-art, full-service hospital facilities on board the USNS Comfort. It can make clean drinking water, it can make power, and it can provide advanced medical care to hundreds of people at a time. As of Monday of this week, as of 2 days ago, the USNS Comfort was treating 7 patients in total, while people were dying of treatable bacterial infections and having their dialysis cut short and being turned away from the hospitals on the island where the Comfort is docked and sitting basically unused while Americans are dying. So it is great to have containers full of food and water and medical supplies sitting in the San Juan Harbor, right? Sitting in the capital city at the port there. It's great to have the USNS Comfort docked there with 800 medical personnel, trained, ready, willing, equipped, and able, desperate to serve. But if your response is so poorly run that even 3 weeks into this, you can't get those containers out of the port, you can't get dying patients onto the hospital ship that is ready to serve them, that is there, then the problem is not shortage of resources. The problem is not people's willingness to help. The problem is not first responders, right? The problem is not even the size of the crisis. The problem is who's in charge. The problem is who is running this ongoing catastrophe that is the failed response that followed the natural disaster. Well, as of today, there is a rumor that we may eventually get someone put in charge of the agency that oversees FEMA, maybe because of continuing chaos in the White House. And maybe that really is only happening now because maybe another senior White House official is going to quit. But at this point, who cares why it's going to happen? Putting somebody in charge is just starting to seem like a good idea, no matter why they're going to do it. Meanwhile, the death toll in the California fires has risen to 21, with many of the worst fires in terms of threats to life and property in Northern California, many of the worst fires still burning basically completely out of control. In parts of Northern California, there are now warnings about the worst ever readings for dangerous air quality. There's ash falling from the sky in even far-flung corners of the densely populated San Francisco Bay Area. In the face of these ongoing, lethal, and in fact worsening disasters, what's happening in Washington? The president made news today at the White House by inveighing against the First Amendment, saying in the Oval Office today that it, quote, is frankly disgusting that the press is able to write whatever it wants to write. People should look into it. He then threatened to take NBC News off the air by revoking NBC's license to broadcast, which is not something that actually works that way, but we know what he means. The source of his anger was reportedly that NBC News report, which cited 3 officials in the room who described the president as suddenly springing the news on military leaders at a Pentagon meeting this summer that he wants the United States to go back to having 32,000 nuclear weapons, please, like we had in the 60s. Our stockpile right now is about 4,000 nuclear weapons. He says he wants 32,000. He wants more than there's ever been, presumably because more is more. It's bigger. There are a couple of different kinds of existential threats to the citizens of a country that has unstable or incoherent or corrupted leadership. And one of them is the one you think about most often in advance when this is a hypothetical situation. You imagine such a leader might create a whole new disaster for the country, like starting a war or launching a nuke on purpose or maybe not, or trying to dismantle the other branches of government or something. Right? That's one kind of crisis, one kind of potentially existential crisis for the citizens of a country with a real leadership problem. You imagine that that type of leader might create a whole new disaster out of whole cloth. The other great existential risk, though, is not a hypothetical thing to worry about. It is something that is happening to some scale right now, and it's already killing Americans. And that's not some sci-fi dystopian thing. It's just the risk, the inevitability that stuff will happen, that crises will arise in the more or less normal course of events. Disaster will befall us. We'll have a terrible hurricane season. And when that happens, we will not have the basic governing organizational capacity to deal with it. It's not a sci-fi hypothetical, dystopian risk. That is what we are living through right now. That is what Americans are dying because of right now in Puerto Rico.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.